I remained lost in these reflections when the door slowly opened and I found myself in the arms of Monsieur Badu. After the first transports of joyful emotion were over, I hastened to address to him the questions that perplexed me, but he interrupted me by saying, "I comprehend you, but keep your curiosity within bounds. The truth is that the day before yesterday, Madame de Lavalette sent for me, and when the servants were gone and the doors shut, she said, 'I am resolved to save my husband as his pardon cannot be obtained, but I do not know where to conceal him. My relations and friends are unable to serve me. I address myself to you with confidence. Procure him only a hiding place, and he shall be free tomorrow.'" This appeal was abrupt and disconcerted me. You know I mix very little in society. To conceal you in my lodgings would have been impossible. I live in a furnished hotel where there are 30 persons besides myself. I mentioned this to Madame de Lavalette. "Think about it immediately," she replied. "You must find for me what I want." At last, after a great deal of hesitation, I requested 2 hours' time, observing that I was connected with the family who had suffered misfortune themselves and who entertained most admirable feelings of courage and devotion. "Go quickly and acquaint them with my situation. I shall owe my life to them if they conceal my husband." I asked for some particulars. No, she said. "You shall all know when you come back, but first run to your friends." I left her and came hither. "Stop. No impatience. You are at Monsieur Bresson's, the treasurer for the Department of Foreign Affairs. Let me go on. Madame Bresson, since her husband's prescription, had made a vow, in the excess of her gratitude towards those who had concealed him, to save some person condemned for a political crime, if ever Providence favored her sufficiently for anyone to fall in her way. I therefore came to her and said that the time was come for the fulfillment of her vow, and I acquainted her with your story and Madame de Lavalette's resolution. 'Let him come,' she said with enthusiasm. 'My husband is not at home, but I need not consult him for the performance of a good action. He shares all my sentiments. I shall immediately prepare a room where the unfortunate man will be safe. Go and acquaint Madame de Lavalette.' I went back to her, and then she explained to me her plan. I listened to her in silence. This was not a fit moment for objections. She talked with so much confidence. She seemed so sure of success that I entered with ardor into all the details of the enterprise. But I wanted a private cabriolet. With Madame de Lavalette's permission, I went to Monsieur de Chaussonneau, whom I knew to be a man both devoted and resolute. These are the means by which you came here, for the success of which a sort of miracle was required. For I must confess I do not myself comprehend how it was done. Now you must be sensible of how much importance it is to your generous friends that nobody may ever know they afforded you this retreat. The whole family would be ruined. Monsieur Bresson cannot do without his situation. He has a daughter and nephews to establish, being a public functionary and lodged under the king's roof, honored with the trust of his minister. He knows full well all the irregularity of his conduct. But, on the other hand, he is convinced of your innocence. And what are all other considerations when they are put in the scale with a man's life? We shall now set about getting you away from hence and beyond the frontiers, which will not be an easy matter. But the most important object is achieved, and Providence will not leave the work imperfect." Monsieur Badu then left me, and I remained alone during 2 hours, scarcely daring to make any motion or even to breathe, buried in sad reflections on the situation of my poor Emily, who remained as a hostage in my dungeon. At about 11 o'clock in the evening, the door opened once more, and I saw a lady enter my lodgings. She was dressed in the highest fashion, and her face was covered with a veil. She was accompanied by a young girl who appeared to be about 14 years old. The lady threw herself into my arms, while the child remained standing bashfully and in tears next to her mother. In the midst of the deep emotions that agitated us all, I could not help saying, "For heaven's sake, Madame, raise that veil, that I may see the features of the angelic person to whom I owe my life." "We are not acquainted," she replied, raising her veil, "but I feel happy in taking a part in the heroic action of Madame de Lavalette. In fact, I never had seen Madame Bresson. She was at that time 40 years of age, but her fine complexion and elegant figure made her look at least 10 years younger. She placed on the stove a sort of tureen, That is your dinner, she said. The 2 courses are in the same vessel. You will make but sorry fare, but we are obliged to rob ourselves to feed you. I do not choose to tell our secret to any of our servants. They all sleep in this corridor, and the next room is occupied by my nephew Stanislaus. So make no noise in the morning, but make your bed and sweep your room yourself. The apartment you are in, never having been inhabited, the least sound might ruin us all. She left me after an hour's conversation. Monsieur Bresson came afterwards. I had wept with the ladies. His visit made me rather merrier. I was no better acquainted with him than with his wife. I had seen him once 15 years before, at the time I went to Saxony. Once more also, I think, at my return, and our acquaintance having ended by my not pursuing the diplomatic career, we had not met again. Monsieur Bresson had very agreeable features, an elegant and cultivated mind, and an energetic character, of which he had more than once given the most striking proofs. It was not his attachment to the emperor that had persuaded him to place himself in such a dangerous situation to serve me, and I do not believe that he ever was fond either of Napoleon or his government. It was a deep feeling of humanity and a courageous protest against those political condemnations of which he had been himself a victim. I just come, said he, from the drawing rooms of some of our grand dignities. You cannot form an idea of the alarm and consternation that fills the minds of everyone at the Tuileries. Nobody will go to bed tonight. They are convinced that your escape is the result of a great plot that is going to burst over them. They see you already at the head of the old army marching against the Tuileries, and all Paris flying to arms. I should not be surprised if they stop the march of the foreign troops who are already preparing for their departure. They talk of shutting the barriers. Think only the terrible consequences of such a measure. The milkwomen will not be able to get into town tomorrow. There will be no milk for the old women's breakfasts. And I listening to all these lamentations, I who have you under lock and key. He then examined with the most minute attention all my modest furniture and what they had brought me. The chest of drawers was filled with his linen and clothes. Open only half your shutters, he added, and let no more light in than just as much as you want to read. If you catch a cold, thrust your head when you cough into this closet. I had asked for some beer to quench the thirst that tormented me for the last month. You cannot have any. We never drink beer, and some observation might be made on the circumstance. I have not forgot the history of Monsieur de Montmorin, who was discovered and died on the scaffold through having eaten a chicken, the bones of which had been thrown at the corner of the door. A neighbor who knew that the woman who concealed him was too poor to buy chicken, guessed that she had in her house an outlaw, and informed against her. You shall have as much sugar and refreshing syrups as you may wish, but no beer. I passed the first night of my liberty in walking up and down and breathing the fresh air through the half-opened window. I could not see into the Rue de Bac, but I heard everything distinctly, and the frequent passing of men on horseback sometimes startled me. At last, in the morning, fatigue got the better of my anxiety, and I fell asleep. 2 hours afterwards, I was awakened by noise near me, and to my great astonishment, I saw in my room a little man who was putting the furniture in order, sweeping and rubbing with great precaution. "Who are you?" I asked. "Monsieur's valet de chambre." "But it was agreed with your master that nobody should come in my room." "They have altered their minds, and if you please to get up, you may step into my chamber while I put everything in order here." I got up, and he led me into another room facing the one where I slept. When he was gone, I began to examine the place I was in. It was too well furnished for a servant's room. The chimney was ornamented with a clock and china vases containing flowers. The bed was elegant. I opened a closet at the head of the bed and found several articles of female attire. What's the meaning of all this? Could the man be married and his wife in on the secret? How? They already had a child and 2 servants entrusted with my fate, and in this house? Is that very prudent? These reflections troubled me so much that my heart throbbed within me. I attempted to rise, but I fell on the floor in a deep swoon. The servant came back in about half an hour, and finding me insensible, he dragged me to my bed, where he had great trouble to bring me to myself. Do all you can, he said, to keep up your spirits, for neither my master nor my mistress can come back until this evening. I shall come if I can, but for heaven's sake, do not fall sick. For how could we call in a doctor? I was but too sensible of the truth of all this good man said to me, and added to myself, suppose I were to die, what would they do with my body? I was soon diverted from these painful reflections by the voice of a news vendor who was crying something in the street. I could not well distinguish what he said, but I thought I heard my own name. I ran to the window, but the man was already too far for me to catch a word of what he uttered. I was obliged to wait until another went by, and 4 hours elapsed before the second came. This time it was a woman whose shrill, sharp voice brought distinctly to my ears the words, Lavalette, householders, landlords. It was undoubtedly an ordinance proclaiming severe penalties on those who would give me refuge. This did not make me uneasy, but at the same time offering rewards to those who might denounce me. And who could know whether among the servants of the house there might not be found one whom the love of lucre might incite to such an act? I was very unjust, for André Joanneau and his wife, whom they called Monte, were old domestics whose fidelity and devotion were proof against all seduction. The woman, in particular, was a pretty Protestant, remarkable for the good education she had received and her elevated sentiments. At last, about 6 o'clock in the evening, while I was still without light, a lady came in and seated herself at the foot of my bed. She inquired in a low voice how I was. I endeavored to tranquilize her and repeated my thanks for her kindness. I am not Madame Bresson, she said. I am her lady's maid. My mistress will certainly come home in an hour or two, but she has heard that you were not very well, and she wished to have some account of your health. Here is another witness, said I to myself with a sigh. I pray to God that so many confidence may not spoil the business, but I have great fears. At last, Madame Bresson came. I spoke to her of the cries I heard in the street. It is nothing, she replied, merely the renewal of an old police ordinance of the year 1793. That makes everybody laugh, for the joy is incredible in Paris. Madame de Lavalette is extolled to the skies. Nothing can be more diverting than the observations of the women among the lower classes, and particularly in the markets. At the theaters, the slightest allusions are seized with enthusiasm, and if government were to attempt to stifle these transports, which, by the by, are something worse than disaffection, their agents would no doubt be murdered. So you may rest easy in that respect. As for the confidence we have made around us, Monsieur Bresson and myself had decided that it would be much safer to tell the whole business to the two servants who sleep facing you. Notwithstanding the greatest precautions, they might have heard you, been alarmed at the unusual noise, and have mentioned it to their comrades. It was much better to close their mouths by trusting them with our secret. They are married and have lived with us during the last 20 years. They are a very worthy couple and would most willingly expose their lives for us. We have moreover resolved that Stanislas should also be told, for he is your next-door neighbor. I will bring him to you this evening. She did so. He was a young man of 20, very well informed, and whose address was agreeable. We soon became friends. He used to remain with me from 11 at night till 2 in the morning. I taught him to play chess, and he brought me the journals and the news of Paris. I must now return to the conciergerie. I had scarcely passed the outer door when the jailer entered my room, and as I had foreseen, retired when he heard a noise behind the screen. But he returned about 5 minutes afterwards, and not seeing anyone, though the same noise was once more repeated, he took a fancy to remove one side of the screen. At the sight of Madame Lavalette, he uttered a loud exclamation and ran to the door. She caught hold of his coat and said to him, "Wait a minute, let my husband get off." "You will ruin me, madame," he said in a rage, and disengaging himself with so great an effort that he left a piece of his coat in the hands of my wife. He went off calling aloud, "The prisoner has escaped." With those words he ran tearing his hair. To the prefect of police, in an instant, all the turnkeys and gendarmes were sent about in all directions. Two of the former reached the sedan chair that was leisurely advancing on the quay. They opened it, and finding no one in it but my daughter, they left it. Soon, however, the pursuit began in regular order, and during the whole night, the houses of my friends and acquaintances, and even all the persons with whom my late situation in the world could have given me the least connection, were rigorously examined. The next day the barriers were shut, and the joy of the whole capital in witnessing the despair of the police was inexpressible. Madame Lavalette, a little easier after half an hour, began to get the better of her agitation, and she would have enjoyed her happiness if the brutal turnkeys who had left her door open had not uttered against her the most horrible abuse, and assured her it was impossible I should not be retaken in a short time. The arrival of the procureur General Billard put an end to their abusive language. He sat himself gravely down to examine her and addressed reproaches to her that were only ridiculous. By his order, she was treated with so much severity that in the state of health in which she was then, that usage became the chief cause of the disorder under which she labored during 12 years, but from which she has at last recovered. They placed her in the chamber of Marshal Ney, where there was no chimney, but a German stove, the suffocating heat of which made her suffer a great deal night and day. The window open into the women's yard. To hear the noisy cries of those wretches during the whole day in their vulgar and obscene language was agony to so delicate a female. No person could come near her. Even her maid was excluded, and she was attended by one of the female turnkeys. None of her letters could cross the threshold of the prison, nor could any communication from her friends reach her. She was forever assailed with 1,000 different terrors, especially in the night when the sentries were relieved. She always imagined it was her husband they were bringing back. During more than 25 days and nights, she did not enjoy one moment's sleep. I was far from thinking she could be so unhappy. I had been told, with the view of comforting me, that she was lodged in the apartments of the lady of the prefect of police, treated with the greatest attention and respect, and that she would soon obtain permission to return home. My daughter had returned to her convent in an ecstasy of joy, and agitated with so strong an emotion that she could not explain in what manner she had contrived to save her father. But when next day the whole business was explained, the superior, who had just succeeded in obtaining the protection of the Duchesse d'Angoulême for her house, was seized with alarm. My daughter was ordered to hold her tongue, and the nuns, some of the boarders, shrunk away from her as if she had the plague. Will it be believed when I add that the parents of several of those boarders declared to the superior that they would take their children home if Josephine Lavalette remained in the convent? So that a virtuous, generous action which ought to have been presented as an example to be followed by young persons was through fear, personal interest, and perhaps also by meaner passions, regarded as a sort of crime and a cause of proscription. 6 weeks afterwards, when Madame de Lavalette was set at liberty, she hastened to take her daughter from the convent.